Hi, great. So you're back and we've made it through to Friday, our first week of destination reader lessons. I really hope you've enjoyed doing them at home. I've certainly enjoyed creating them and recording them at my home for you to do. So we're on our fifth lesson and we are going to be continuing just like we have been all week with keywords or your really important words written for you and read so that you know that they're really important. And the questions that you're going to answer are going to be written in blue. And once again, you'll have some writing time to get your answers down. And this will be written for you in green. Okay, so I bet you're all ready to go. Just have a quick check and make sure that you have a copy of the story, a strategy prompt sheet, a pencil or a pen, and a piece of paper or your home learning book to write your ideas down on. If you don't have those things, press pause and go and get them together. Press pause now. The BFG by Roald Dahl. Okay, so we're going to continue with strategy number 2, asking questions. This is going to be our final day where we're focusing on asking questions. But of course, whenever you're reading, you should always be asking questions anyway, because it helps us to really understand the text. And there we go. And I'm asking you, why do good readers ask questions? I'm sure you know by now, why do good readers ask questions? I want you to have a think, say your answer out loud, and then write it down. When you have done, you can press play and continue. Why do good readers ask questions? Press pause now. Fantastic. So you're back, and this is why good readers ask questions. I wonder if you've got the same answer as me. Good readers ask questions as they read because it helps them to understand what is happening in the story. Asking questions also keeps the reader interested and want to read more. And you might have written about little questions popping into your mind as you read. Now remember, we can't always answer the questions that we have when we're asking questions in Destination Reader. Sometimes we've got to keep reading to find out the answer. Right, so we're going to have a look at the vocabulary. So I've chosen some words and a phrase that we're going to talk through together because it's going to help you when you're reading this chapter. Our first word is curious. My turn, your turn. My turn, curious, your turn. My turn, curious, your turn. Curious. Now, there are different meanings for curious, but in this context, when we're reading, it's going to mean something that is strange or unusual. Curious. My turn, weird sensation, your turn. My turn, weird sensation, your turn. Weird sensation is a phrase. It means an odd or a strange feeling. So if you have a bit of an unusual, strange feeling, you might be having a weird sensation. My turn, desolate, your turn. My turn, desolate, your turn. Desolate, it's a place or it could be a feeling which is deserted and empty and lonely. Desolate. My turn, Kevin, your turn. My turn, Kevin, your turn. A cavern is a large cave or an area within a cave. And in this chapter, we're going to learn that the BFG lives in a cave and one of his rooms is a cavern. It's an area within his cave, a bit like a room in your house. Cavern. Great. So let's get our books ready. So we need to be on page 12, and the chapter is The Cave. So everybody get their books ready on page 12, and the title is The Cave. Have a think about what might be happening in this chapter. I'm going to read, and you're going to follow along with your finger, and we're going to stop at points to ask questions. Okay, are you ready? Great. Let's go. The giant ran on and on, but now a curious change took place in his way of running. He seemed suddenly to go into a higher gear. Faster and faster he went, and soon he was travelling at such a speed that the landscape became blurred. The wind stung Sophie's cheeks. It made her eyes water. It whipped her head back and whistled in her ears. She could no longer feel the giant's feet touching the ground. She had a weird sensation they were flying. It was impossible to tell whether they were over land or sea. This giant had some sort of magic in his legs. The wind rushing against Sophie's face became so strong that she had to duck down again into the blanket to prevent her head from being blown away. Was it really possible that they were crossing oceans? It certainly felt that way to Sophie. She crouched in the blanket and listened to the howling of the wind. It went on for what seemed like hours. We're going to stop there. I've got a couple of questions. I'm thinking, are the giant and Sophie flying? And I'm also wondering, why is it so windy? Okay, let's keep reading. Then, all at once, the wind stopped its howling. The pace began to slow down. Sophie could feel the giant's feet pounding once again over the earth. She poked her head up out of the blanket to have a look. They were in a country of thick forests and rushing rivers. The giant had definitely slowed down and was now running more normally, although normal was a silly word to use to describe a galloping giant. He leapt over a dozen rivers. He went rattling through a great forest, then down into a valley and up over a range of hills as bare as concrete, and soon he was galloping over a desolate wasteland that was not quite of this earth. The ground was flat and pale yellow. Great lumps of blue rock were scattered around, and dead trees stood everywhere like skeletons. The moon had long since disappeared, and now the dawn was breaking. Sophie, still peering out from the blanket, saw suddenly ahead of her a great craggy mountain. The mountain was dark blue, and all around it the sky was gushing and glistening with light. Bits of pale gold were flying among delicate frosty white flakes of cloud, and over to one side the rim of the morning sun was coming up as red as blood. Right beneath the mountain the giant stopped. He was puffing mightily. His great chest was heaving in and out. He paused to catch his breath. And we're going to stop there because I've got a couple of questions. I wonder why the giant is now slowing down. And I'm also wondering, why has the giant stopped? I wonder if you've got some questions too. Let's keep reading and see if our questions are going to be answered. Directly in front of them, lying against the side of the mountain, Sophie could see a massive round stone. It was as big as a house. The giant reached out and rolled the stone to one side as easily as if it had been a football, and now where the stone had been, there appeared a vast black hole. The hole was so large the giant didn't even have to duck his head as he went in. He strode into the black hole, still carrying Sophie in one hand, the trumpet and the suitcase in the other. As soon as he was inside, he stopped and turned and rolled the great stone back into place so that the entrance to his secret cave was completely hidden from the outside. Now that the entrance had been sealed up, there was not a glint of light inside the cave. All was black. Sophie felt herself being lowered to the ground. Then the giant let go the blanket completely. His footsteps moved away. Sophie sat there in the dark, shivering with fear. Now we're going to stop there and we're going to think about some questions. So I'm thinking to myself, why does the giant want to keep his cave a secret? And I also want to know, how do we know that Sophie is very frightened? I want you to think of your questions about anything that we have read so far. See if you can use different question words. I've used why, how do we know, and I wonder. See if you can think of 3 questions about what we have read. Ask your questions out loud, then write your questions down. Once you've done that, press play when you're ready to begin again. Press pause now. Well done. I wonder what questions you came up with. Get your finger ready. We're just about to start on page 15. He is getting ready. Get your finger ready and off we go. He is getting ready to eat me, she told herself. He will probably eat me raw just as I am. Or perhaps he will boil me first, or he will have me fried. He will drop me like a rasher of bacon into some gigantic frying pan, sizzling with fat. A blaze of light suddenly lit up the whole place. Sophie blinked and stared. She saw an enormous cavern with a high rocky roof. The walls on either side were lined with shelves, and on the shelves there stood row upon row of glass jars. There were jars everywhere. They were piled up in the corners. They filled every nook and cranny of the cave. In the middle of the floor there was a table 12 feet high and a chair to match. And 12 feet high, I know that's about the height of 2 men. So that's really high. Okay, we're going to stop there. And I've got some questions that have popped into my mind. I wonder if the giant is planning on eating Sophie. And I'm also wondering, why are there so many jars in the cave? I wonder what questions you've got. See if you can use some different question words. Think of 3 questions about what we have read so far. Ask your questions out loud, then write your question down. Once you've done that, press play when you're ready to begin again. Press pause now. Great. I wonder what questions you've come up with. I bet you've got lots and lots of great and interesting questions. Right, we're going to keep reading the last part of this chapter. The giant took off his black cloak and hung it against the wall. Sophie saw that under the cloak he was wearing a sort of collarless shirt and a dirty old leather waistcoat that didn't seem to have any buttons. His trousers were faded green and were far too short in the legs. On his bare feet he was wearing a pair of ridiculous sandals that for some reason had holes cut along each side, with a large hole at the end where his toes stuck out. Sophie, crouching on the floor of the cave in her nightie, gazed back at him through thick steel-rimmed glasses. She was trembling like a leaf in the wind. Oh, that's a simile. She was trembling like a leaf in the wind, and a finger of ice was running up and down the length of her spine. "Ha!" shouted the giant, walking forward and rubbing his hands together. "What has us got here?" His booming voice rolled around the walls of the cave like a burst of thunder. And we are going to stop there. And I've got some more questions popping into my head. And I'm wondering why the giant is wearing dirty and faded clothes. And I'm also wondering, will Sophie try and escape from the cave? I want you to think of 3 questions about what we've read. I want you to ask your questions out loud, then write your questions down. Once you've done that, press play when you're ready to begin again. Press pause now. Great. Okay, so we've got too many chapters in this book for the number of lessons that we're going to have. So just like we sometimes do in class, I'm going to read the next chapter to you. You can sit back, close your eyes and listen, or you can follow along with your book. It's up to you. Get comfy and listen to me read. And when I'm reading, you might notice little questions popping into your head that you want to find out a bit more about. You can always write these down at the end of my reading. Okay, are you ready? Get comfy. Off we go. The BFG. The giant picked up the trembling Sophie with one hand and carried her across the cave and put her on the table. Now he really is going to eat me, Sophie thought. The giant sat down and stared hard at Sophie. He had truly enormous ears. Each one was as big as the wheel of a truck, and he seemed to be able to move them inwards and outwards from his head as he wished. "I is hungry," the giant boomed, his teeth showing massive square. He grinned, showing massive square teeth. The teeth were very white and very square, and they sat in his mouth like huge slices of white bread. "Please don't eat me," Sophie stammered. The giant let out a bellow of laughter. "Just because I is a giant, you think I is a man-gobbling cannibal?" he shouted. "You is about right. Giants is all cannibally and murderful, and they does gobble up human beings. We is in giant country now. Giants is everywhere around. Out there us has the famous bone-crunching giant. Bone-crunching giant crunches up 2 whoopsie-whiffling human beings for supper every night. Noise is air-bursting. Noise of crunching bones goes crickety-crack for miles around." "Ouch," Sophie said. "Bone-crunching giant only gobbles human beings from Turkey," the giant said. "Every night bone cruncher is galloping off to Turkey to gobble Turks." Sophie's sense of patriotism was suddenly so bruised by this remark that she became quite angry. "Why Turks?" she blurted out. "What's wrong with the English?" "Bone-crunching giant says Turks is tasting, oh, ever so much juicier and more scrumdiddlyumptious. Bone Cruncher says Turkish human beings has a glamoury flavour. He says Turks from Turkey is tasting of turkey." "I suppose they would," Sophie said. "Of course they would," the giant shouted. "Every human being is diddly and different. Some is scrumdiddlyumptious, and some is acky-slush. Greeks is all full of acky-slush. No giant is eating Greeks ever." "Why not?" Sophie asked. "Greeks from Greece is tasting greasy," the giant said. "I imagine that's possible too," Sophie said. She was wondering with a bit of a tremble what all this talking about eating people was leading up to. Whatever happened, she simply must play along with this peculiar giant and smile at his jokes. But were they jokes? Perhaps the great brute was just working up an appetite by talking about food. "As I am saying," the giant went on, "all human beings is having different flavours. Human beings from Panama is tasting very strong of hats." "Why hats?" Sophie said. "You is not very clever," the giant said, moving his great ears in and out. "I thought all human beings is full of brains, but your head is emptier than a bundongle." "Do you like Vegetables? Sophie asked, hoping to steer the conversation towards a slightly less dangerous kind of food. You is trying to change the subject, the giant said sternly. We is having an interesting babblement about the taste of human bean. The human bean is not a vegetable. Oh, but the bean is a vegetable, Sophie said. Not the human bean, the giant said. The human bean has 2 legs and a vegetable has no legs at all. Sophie didn't argue any more. The last thing she wanted to do was to make the giant cross. The human bean, the giant went on, is coming in dillions of different flavours. For instance, human beans from Wales is tasting very wishy of fish. There is something very fishy about Wales. You mean Wales, Sophie said. Wales is something quite different. Wales is Wales, the giant said. Don't gobble funk around with words. I will now give you another example. Human beings from Jersey has a most disgustable woolly tickle off the tongue, the giant said. Human beings from Jersey is tasting of cardigans. You mean jerseys, Sophie said. You are once again gobble-funking, the giant shouted. Don't do it. This is a serious and snitchy subject. May I continue? Please do, Sophie said. Danes from Denmark is tasting ever so much of dogs. The giant went on. Of course, Sophie said. They taste of Great Danes. Wrong, cried the giant, slapping his thigh. Danes from Denmark is tasting doggy because they is tasting of Labradors. Then what do the people of Labrador taste of? Sophie asked. Danes, the giant cried triumphantly. Great Danes! Aren't you getting a bit mixed up? Sophie said. I is a very mixed up giant, the giant said, but I does do my best, and I is not nearly as mixed up as the other giants. I know one who gallops all the way to Wellington for his supper. Wellington, Sophie said. Where's Wellington? Your head is full of squashed flies, the giant said. Wellington is in New Zealand. The human beans in Wellington has an especially scrumptious taste. So says the welly-eating giant. What do the people of Wellington taste of? Sophie asked. Boots, the giant said. Of course, Sophie said. I should have known. Sophie decided that this conversation had now gone on long enough. If she was going to be eaten, she'd rather get it over and done with right away than be kept hanging around any more. What sort of human beings do you eat? She asked, trembling. Me? Shouted the giant, his mighty voice making the glass jars rattle on their shelves. Me? Gobbling up human beings? This I never! The others, yes, all the others is gobbling them up night, but not me. I is a freaky giant. I is a nice and jumbly giant. I is the only nice and jumbly giant in giant country. I is the big friendly giant. I is the BFG. What is your name? My name is Sophie, Sophie said, hardly daring to believe the good news she had just heard. And we're going to stop right there. And I've definitely got lots of questions. I want to know, I wonder why the giant speaks in such a way. It's all mixed up and it's all muddled. And I also want to know, is it true? Does the giant really not eat human beings? I certainly hope for Sophie that he doesn't. And I also want to know about Wellington in New Zealand because that's where my sister lives. I better tell her about the welly-eating giant and make sure she keeps away from him. Okay, so you must have lots and lots of questions now. What I want you to do is to write down your questions, make a note of your ideas, and if you want to, you could always email them to us at school so we can have a look and see what you have been thinking about. Okay, we're going to stop there now. On Monday, we're going to continue reading the BFG. No sneaky looking over the weekend, please. And we're going to be focusing on a new strategy. So make a list of those questions you have a lovely weekend, and I'll look forward to being back with you doing Destination Reader on Monday. Have a great weekend. Take care. Bye.